Okay. We're going to do chapter 3. Okay. I do not have time for covering this one, integumentary system. It's a small chapter. It's about skin. It's organelles or not organelles. It's segments. So this one, it will be on the test next week. You're responsible to know it. There's no empty blanks. Because even last term, I did not have time to get through this. Okay? So you're going to do this on your own. It will be on the test. I'll only ask you material from this packet for this particular. For my exams, I only ask stuff from my packets. Unless I told you, okay, please cover this on your own from the book. Otherwise, everything is just for my packets. Okay? Okay. Now what we're going to do is on the tissues. So as I said, chapter 3, chapter 4 are very important. Majority of your tests will come from there. After that is chapter 4, and then after that, chapter 1. Okay? This chapter is going to be very important because majority of the stuff you'll always come back to it throughout the term. So I'll introduce to you what the bone cells are. Then when we talk about the skeletal system, we go more in depth. I'll teach you what the brain cell looks like and its function. Nervous system, we go more in detail. So if you kind of understand this chapter, the rest of the term tends to go much easier for you. Okay? Because these are just the basics. Now, tissue. Groups of specialized cells, all of them have a similar structure and perform a common function. There are 4 major types of tissues we have. They're epithelial, connective tissue, so epithelial, connective tissue, nervous, and muscle. Okay? Those are the 4 different types of tissues we have. All of the 75 trillion cells in our body all basically belong to one of these cell types or tissue types. Now let's talk about epithelial tissue first. Some of them are just characteristic, which I'm going to go. Basically, there are epithelial sheets of cells which lines or covers surface cavities of bodies. Cellularity. Cells are bound close to each other. They're not far apart, they're close to each other. Okay? I'm not going to read word for word. We don't have time. Polarity is the one side, so this is a cell. The one that is the bottom is called the basal layer, and the top is called the apical layer. And the apical layer is the one that will have the cilia or the flagella. Okay? So you have the basal layer, okay? Have an exposed apical surface right here, and it will have a basal surface right here. Attachment. The basal layer is attached to a basement membrane or basal membrane. So this structure right here is the basement membrane or the basal membrane. It's a layer that the cell will rest on, okay, as you guys are sitting on a chair. Avascularity. It does not consist of blood vessels. So blood vessels are found in other tissues that, via diffusion, the nutrients just go there. But there's no blood vessels. So right here you can have a cell. Here is the basal layer, here's the apical layer, and this right here is the basal membrane or the basement membrane. Now, epithelial tissue, there's 2 types. You have smooth or you have granular. Smooth types is protect the underlying tissue. Granular makes up glands in our body. So if we talk about the smooth types, the smooth type is named according to 2 different characteristics: layers or the cell structure. So if you have a single layer, it's called simple. If you have 2 or more layers, it's called stratified. Does that make sense? So if there's only 1 layer of cells, it's called single. If you have more layers, then it's called stratified. The second characteristic is the cell structure. If the cell looks flat, meaning like this, Okay, and when I say it's a nuclei, when you're looking at the cell, you're looking at the nuclei. If the nuclei looks flat, like squished together, it's called squamous. Okay? If the nuclei of the cell looks like a cube, okay, it's called cuboidal. Okay? If the nuclei of the cell, the nucleus, looks like a column like this, okay, it's called columnar. Does that make sense? So those two characteristics are combined to name the epithelium. So if I have, let's say, how would you call this epithelium? Exactly. Exactly. Okay, if they actually look like a cube, stratified cuboidal. Does that make sense? Now, granular glands, you have two types. You have endocrine and exocrine. And we'll talk about them in a little bit detail later. Okay? Right now, just introduction. Now, this chapter, your book tends to go really in detail. It sometimes classifies stuff differently. You need to follow my notes, especially for this chapter. Okay? So do not get confused. For this one, follow my chapter, my notes, because that's how I'm teaching you. This is how I expect you to do it. Okay? Now, at home, you could basically figure this out. It tells you that here is what the cell looks like. It looks squamous, it looks cuboidal, it looks columnar. Okay? If you had single layer, how would you call it? If you had single layer, how would you call it? If it had a single layer, how would you call it? Okay, so you could figure out how it is. I usually do it in class, we just don't have time. So you could draw it to see what I'm trying to say, and then you could name it. Okay? So you can name this epithelium. Now this again shows you a photo of it, and it tells you what the function is and where would you find it. This is the photo I expect you to do. Okay? Now, there are certain special epithelium that don't follow this rule. You have pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Okay? Nucleus situated at different levels. So, pseudo means false. Okay? Pseudo-stratified. It looks like there's multiple layers, but there's only one layer. Because when you look at in microscope at the cells, you can't see everything about the cell. You only tend to see the nuclei. So, here's one layer, correct? If I draw a nuclei right here, nuclei right here, nuclei right here, nuclei right here. If you could only basically see the nuclei, not really rest of it's very faint. When you look at the microscope, it doesn't look like there's multiple layers, but it's only one layer, right? So this is pseudo-stratified. It falsely looks multi-layered. Okay? And you find this nasal cavity, trachea, bronchi. Function is protection and secretion. So here is a photo of it showing you. Special epithelium. Another one is transitional epithelium. Consists of multiple layers. Consists of combination of cuboidal and odd-looking cells. So you have basically a cuboidal one, and then you have like a triangular one. Okay. Consists of combination of cuboidal and odd-shaped cells. Location is in the urinary bladder. Function, ability to stretch. Your bladder stretches to hold urine. Again, just a photo for you, and these other locations. So in histology, in lab, you will see more in detail. Now, one thing I forgot to say, when I lecture, I tend to go theory, okay? There's no point me having, I don't know if I told you, if I, showing every single thing about a heart and I don't have a heart, okay? Where lab, you have a heart and that makes more sense. So what the lab is going to cover, I don't tend to cover, and vice versa. Dr. Yusuf will make you responsible for what he wants you to know for the lab. I make you responsible for what I want you to know for the lecture. Get two different things. Just because you did not cover this in lecture does not mean you're not responsible in lab. He will tell you. Make sense? Okay. Glands. Basically, epithelial tissue that synthesizes and secretes products. Some types of glands. You have endocrine, and you have exocrine. Endocrine secretes products into bloodstream. Exocrine releases in ductless, organs which are like ducts. Okay, ductless organs. Little tubes or ducts. That's where exocrine. As I told you, when I come down here, it's very hard to write. Okay, like organs, like ducts, hollow organs or something. Endocrine, bloodstream, everything else. So if it's released into your stomach, if it's released, let's say, in your intestine, that's an exocrine. Endocrine gland into your bloodstream. Example of an endocrine gland, thyroid gland. Example of an exocrine gland, your sweat gland. Now, basement membrane. Function is protection. Location underneath the epithelium. So right here you have epithelial cell. Okay? Right underneath the epithelium, do you see you have this layer right here, which is the basement membrane of the basal lamina. Huh? What is the basement membrane basal lamina made up of? It's not a cell, it's basically a chemical. It's actually made up of protein. The composition is protein, so it's acellular. Acellular means it's not a living thing. Huh?
What is acellular? Sorry.
Acellular means it's not a living thing.
Okay.
Secretion. So what happens, these cells, the epithelial itself will make that protein and it will secrete that protein and the protein gets embedded right underneath it. Does that make sense?
Can you say that again?
Okay. So this epithelial cell will make the protein, the basement membrane. The protein, once it makes it, it gets deposited down there. And then it becomes a foundation. Does that make sense? Okay.
On the top picture, would both the thick red lines on the top and the bottom be a basement membrane? Okay,
Yes.
so it just, whatever you're looking
Because
at.
this is a vessel. So
Okay.
vessel is circular.
Okay.
Okay? That's why. So yes, every time there's epithelial right underneath the basal surface, there's going to be epithelial, basement membrane. Make sense? I know I'm going a little fast. I apologize. Okay. Now let's talk about certain junctions. We have junctions between our cells. One of them is a tight junction. Tight junction, I'm not even going to try to write it in this box. Okay? Tight junction, basically, so if this is one cell, here's another cell, and this is the plasma membrane. It seals the plasma membrane in such a way that nothing can cross between the two cells. Does that make sense? So tight junction basically sews the plasma membrane tightly together so nothing can exchange between two cells. That is tight junctions. You find them in the bladder. Do you want your urine to escape? Okay? In your GI system, you don't want your nutrients to escape either. I'll come back to adhesion. Gap junction is basically the two plasma membranes are sealed, but between them you have a little holes or pores. These channels allow substance to go in and out. So right here, you could see here's a plasma membrane, here's a plasma membrane, and they're sealed together, but they have little pores, little holes in it going through. They allow like a passageway for something to exchange between two cells, either ions, either electrical impulse. Okay? Make sense? So tight junction will be found, gap junctions will be found. Example of gap junction would be in the heart. This is how the electrical stimulus jumps from one cell to the next. Okay, even in the bones. Adhesion junction is the plasma membrane are sealed together but so loosely that there is movement. Your skin has adhesion junction. This is how you're able to stretch, move. Okay? And I gave you other photo to identify it. As you can see right here, plasma membrane, they're so tightly sewed together, nothing can cross between these two cells. So tight junction, adhesion junction, and then gap junction. So tight junction, adhesion junction, gap junction.
What's the difference between adhesion and gap? Is it just
Adhesion, well, okay, so gap is basically you have had a protein embedded and that protein has a passageway. So substance will go in and out between two cells. But adhesion, they're proteins, but the proteins are loosely attached. Therefore, it allows movement. Adhesion for movement, gap for allowing substance to
so the adhesion nothing has to do, it's just to be able to stretch?
Exactly. It's just so it can stretch. Okay, now connective tissue. Supports and connects body parts together. Composition. Now we have multiple types of connective tissue, but the basic idea is the same. Okay? Composition is cellular, and the cells will be changed depending on what type of connective tissue we're talking about. Okay? And you have the matrix, which is acellular or non-cellular. Matrix is the strength of the connective tissue. So, cellular means cells. So right here, let's say connected, I have a cell right here, I have another cell, another cell, another cell. Okay, all of these are cells. Now these cells actually produce the matrix and they secrete it, and the secretion gets embedded around it. And what the matrix is actually made up of determines on what type of connective tissue we're talking about. Does that make sense? Okay? So these cells will be different from one type of connective tissue to the next. The matrix will be different from one type of connective tissue to the next. Again, we'll cover that right now. Does that make sense? So these cells produce the matrix and they secrete it and it gets embedded around it. So this is all connective tissue. Cellular part and the acellular part, or the matrix part. Okay? Now, you have two main categories. This is how I'm going to identify it to make it simpler. Your book was more complicated. That's why I want you to follow it this way. Two main categories. You have fibrous. I'm going to write it right here so you can see, okay? 1 and 2. One is fibrous. Okay? And 2 is specialized. Specialized. So now fibrous connective tissue. What is the function of fibrous connective tissue? Connects various body parts together, providing strength, support, and flexibility. Consists of cellular part. What cell do I want you to know? Fibroblast. Blast, anytime you hear it ends with a blast, blast means its function is to make something. And the prefix, okay, will tell you what it's supposed to make. So fibroblast makes fibers. Does that make sense? What fibers does it make? Collagen? Reticular? And elastic. So these are the 3 types of fibers. Collagen, elastic, and reticular. Don't women, when we get older, we get wrinkles and we get really conscious and we're like, okay, I need to get rid of my wrinkles and we apply stuff. And don't they say, oh, it stimulates collagen production? That's what's going on. The connective tissue is losing the collagen. So you're trying to stimulate the collagen to be produced, therefore the wrinkles will be gone. As we get older, the fibers in our skin tend to decrease. Make sense? Matrix is non-cellular, which is made up of ground substance. Example is a gel-like, almost rubbery consistency, and the fibers. What fibers? Are the collagen, elastic, and reticular fibers. We have 4 different types of fibrous connective tissue. Loose fibers, so loose, dense, elastic, and reticular. These are the 4 types of fibrous connective tissue. So right here you could see the connective tissue. You could see the ground substance. The basically gray area is the ground substance. Right here you have the fibroblast, and the fibroblast is producing the collagen fibers, the elastic fibers, and where's the reticular fibers? It's right here, the reticular fibers. Okay, and this is one connective tissue, the basic concept. Okay? You have other cells which I don't need you to memorize anything. So let's talk about loose connective tissue, which is classified as a fibrous type. It has collagen and elastic fibers, but no particular pattern. Okay, as you can see right here, they're just randomly spread. There's no orientation to them. Because there's no orientation, it allows flexibility, but there's not that much strength to this connective tissue. Location is where it needs to be able to stretch. It needs to be flexible, like your blood vessels. Okay? Doesn't your blood vessels need to enlarge, shrink? So it needs to have that flexibility. Okay? There are many types which I don't need you to memorize which types. I don't know if Dr. Yusuf does, but for lecture, this much is enough. Okay? Dense connective tissue. There's more collagen than it's found in loose connective tissue. Okay? But the collagen are in one orientation. Okay? As you can see, all of the fibers are running in this direction. Because they're running in one direction, it's very strong. It's more strength than flexibility. Dense connective tissue is the strongest connective tissue because of the fiber orientation. So if I pull in this direction, in the direction that the fibers are running, it's not going to break. If I pull in the direction the fibers are being read, so this way. So it's like rubber band. If you pull it, it's not going to break. But if I pull it in the opposite direction, then it's going to break. Does that make sense? Few blood vessels, okay? Therefore, it takes a long time to heal. Location is tendons, ligaments. Okay? Again, there are many types. Elastic connective tissue. High proportion of elastic fibers. So it's found in organs that need to regularly change shape and size. So which organs do you need regularly? Bladder's one? Lungs, right? So those are, there are other ones, but these are the certain organs. So why is elastic? Because if you pull the electricity, it will come back. So example is lungs, bladder. Okay. Now reticular connective tissue. I'm going fast, but there's not that much. It's just memorization. Reticular connective tissue. It's made up of reticular fibers. It forms the internal framework. It's found in liver and lymphoid tissue. What is the lymphoid tissue? Spleen and tonsils. Spleen and tonsils is the lymphoid tissue. So it's found in liver and lymphoid tissue, spleen and tonsils. And this is the image. Okay, now we are finished talking about the fibrous connective tissue. We talked about it loose, dense, elastic, and reticular. Now we're going to talk about the specialized, okay? Which is more interesting. specialized connective tissue are 4 different types. Adipose, bone, blood, and cartilage. The ABCs. A, B, C. Okay, the ABCs. Adipose, bone, blood, and cartilage. Let's talk about adipose tissue first. Adipose tissue is fat tissue.